Angela Pao-Johnson, and I'm the Executive Director of North Los Angeles County Regional Center. Welcome back to Voices in Action, a podcast that raises up the voices of those that have made such instrumental change to our developmental disabilities community. I am joined today by Marty Omoto, who is, his decades of advocacy is very well known in our community. He is the founder and director of CDCAN, which is a grassroots organization that promotes social justice amongst the developmentally disabled. Thank you so much for joining us. And with Marty is his son, Alex. And I've just had the pleasure of actually hosting a legislative breakfast with Marty. We actually flew in unexpectedly on a plane together from Sacramento to Los Angeles to attend this breakfast. And so we've had a full day together. I actually asked him if he would do this podcast not very long ago, and he agreed, and we are incredibly thankful. So you've been a tireless advocate for decades. We are wondering what first drew you into this work. We know that a lot of our personal journeys are tied to the work that we currently do and how we approach advocacy today. So we'd like to hear more about your personal story.
My story of why I got involved is probably not different than a lot of people, why they end up getting committed into working with people with disabilities or working in the system that serves people with disabilities. And I mentioned earlier during the breakfast, and I've mentioned in all my advocacy throughout the years when I talk to groups about what touched my heart to get me involved. Now, first of all, I got involved in the personal life of my family, with my sister who had developmental disabilities. And my family raised her. My parents, I give a lot of tribute to them and the way they raised our family. We had 7, and she's the second oldest. I'm the third. And they raised us in a way that we were not different, and that each of us had chores in the house, and hers were no different than ours. We all ate together. We all played together. I didn't notice the difference about her. I mean, I knew she might have been a little different in understanding things, but until I went to junior high school with her when I was 12, and I looked up to her actually because I was scared. And so I asked her, if she could show me around. And so I was kind of like looking up to her to show me. And I was shocked to see how other students treated her as a student in the special ed room. And I'll never forget the number. It was room 31. And it was other kids referred to it as the MR room. My first day, first or second day there, we dressed up for PE, and I'll never forget. We're standing out in the outside, waiting for the coach to come out, and then down the hallway, I see my sister. I see a figure coming up, and I realized it was my sister. Now, earlier in the day, she was really proud, and she was like the proud sister showing me around the school. Hours later, I see this person, and she's hunched over, and she's wearing her school clothes, but she has rags, dirty mop, bucket full of dirty water, and her head is down. The only reason I turned is because I could hear everyone laughing. And then I turned and saw who they were laughing at. And I knew the last thing she wanted me is to see her that way. But unfortunately, she looked up, and then we saw each other. And then she looked down again. At that moment, I didn't know what to do. And I was looking towards the teacher, the coach, hoping he would intervene, but he didn't. And to this day, it just burned in my memory that this wasn't the first time it happened to her. It's just the first time that I saw it. And I just remembered that I had some choices I could make. I could just do nothing, ignore it, or I could decide I'm going to do what I can, because my parents never knew this was happening. And so even as a 12-year-old, I just figured this is not right. Janitorial work is not bad, but if they only make special ed students do it and make them do it during school hours, and if they're being laughed at, they did nothing. Because to me, janitorial work is commendable for anyone, but if you're gonna make people do it, students do it, and not paid, then make everybody do it. And by the way, they weren't asked, "Oh, do you want to do this?" They were told that they had to do this. So I went to the principal, and like a lot of things that we discussed today in advocacy, the first time, the first meeting doesn't always work. But over several meetings with the principal, either I shamed him in some way in my little squeaky 12-year-old voice, and I was that shorter back then. They changed the rules and they stopped doing that. Now, they didn't stop the other problems regarding shaming other students with special needs, but at least they stopped that. That's when I realized, and I tell people my day in terms of as an advocate, beyond just being an advocate within my family, but being an advocate outside my family, began in September 1966 because it burned in my memory. And so from that day forward, I realized that was a role that I had to fulfill. One thing I will say, though, is, and maybe the North LA Regional Center can help foster this, is that families can teach siblings, especially the siblings who are closest to the person with developmental disabilities, what their options are in life. Because I was just 12 and she's my older sister. I didn't want to, to be this other person, but I had to be. But no one told me and no one taught me. And I think that's something that would have been helpful if someone would have said, hey, you know what? You're going to go to school. This is you need to step up. And so I kind of did that on my own. And that's one thing I would actually offer up to other families, but also to the regional centers where you can be helpful. I mean, parents didn't ask for any of this either, but certainly the siblings didn't. And it's not a burden. It's another responsibility. And I think we just have to be taught, this is what you have to do. I ended up accepting it, but no one told me. So if I didn't do it, God knows what would have happened to her, because I stayed with her all through her life in the different stages after my mom died. And then later on, as she was having, and then her life stabilized, but then she had medical crisis and I was with her. So I've been through all the systems, Medi-Cal, Medicare, everything, acute care hospitals, and seen that part of the life too. And again, it all started from that day in 1966. So you never know where things will lead you, just like for you or anybody else, right?
I feel like your story is incredibly poignant. And I think the first thing that I noted was you had shared that in your family that there was no difference to how your sister was treated, how you were treated. Everybody was just treated as children, as members of the family. And you only saw the differences until you were 12 years old and you encountered that situation where your sister was made to feel different. And you were able to see what her life looked like from that lens. And I think that's incredibly powerful, because I know very recently, one of the things that NLARC did is we actually, we hosted a cultural sensitivity training for our staff. And I'm a little bit older than some of my staff. And it was really interesting because we talked about what were the discussions that were being had about individuals with developmental disabilities when we were growing up. And so when I reflected back, I remember thinking, I don't remember any discussions, Marty. I don't remember any discussions at all. And so that was interesting. And I am, my background is Chinese. I don't speak Cantonese that fluently. With all that being said, I don't think there is a word for individuals with developmental disabilities. It translates to people with problems. So I thought that was really interesting. So as I was growing up, it was just, we don't talk about it. My peers in that same training that we took, they said, we don't talk about it either, but we treat such and such just like a part of the family. We don't talk about it because it doesn't need to be talked about. And I feel like because your family actually started out that way, I think that probably spoke to why it seemed so inequitable when you were seeing what was occurring with your sister at school. And I completely agree with you. I think it's really important for siblings to know how they can advocate, because sometimes they're just thrown into it. But I also think how important it is to just build an environment of integration from the get-go so there isn't any difference, right? So, and that's the environment that we're hoping to build today.
I think that's within your influence as a regional center and the staff, right? Working, and also if you develop trust with the families where you can do that, because that could be meaningful. I mean, so I'm a little kid, and after that time period, as I saw her grow up, there was other things happening, and I didn't know what things I should let my parents know, because my sister would beg me, don't tell mom and dad. So I didn't. I needed to be very aggressive in a different way. both physically, but also vocally. So as time went on, when someone would hurt my sister, like at school, junior high school, so this is after that incident, they made fun of her or they made fun of anybody. So I'm little, this big football player type said something, your sister's an MR, but he didn't do anything because I think he knew he was wrong. But that's why in my later advocacy in the state, why I was willing to speak up is probably because of that. That, you're driven to this point that if you don't say something and you allow other people to do something to harm someone that you care about, they're counting on you to be submissive, right? And also, I think it was a cultural thing too, that they expect I'm a Japanese American to not do anything. So I worked against my stereotype too. So I was working against the history of Japanese culture, but also the natural thing of. So there's a lot of stuff I had to learn and I found out, but I think this is something within the regional center, and not only for you, but for other groups or providers, partners, as you described them, that can help educate or help each other. Because I could have used those tools much earlier and maybe stopped and prevented, things that happen later on in her life.
You shared this really beautiful quote, and I don't want to misquote it, so I might ask you to share it again. But I think it was from Hemingway. It said you had mentioned something about how sometimes there are broken pieces. We're broken in different ways, but the broken pieces, once healed, can even be stronger. Something.
Yeah, Hemingway is a paraphrase that I paraphrase him. But many are broken by life, but some are made stronger in the broken places. And that just resonated with me because I felt my parents were broken. When this first happened with the birth, they didn't understand it, 1950s. Japanese culture normally that is shameful, that you would actually hide the child. They didn't do that. No one taught them not to do that, but something drove them in terms of their innate decency not to do that. And yet they built and became stronger and made my family stronger. My mom actually practiced forms of ABA that I didn't recognize what she was doing. I used to criticize her, like, why are you telling her to do this or telling her like set boundaries? And she would be repetitive things that she was doing. Retrospect, she was doing an early version of ABA. She didn't know it. No one taught her. But looking back, I recognize, wow, she was what she was trying to do. But I think of that Hemingway line because I think of all of her life. Yeah, life has broken her in many ways, and my family, Alex's family, mother. But it doesn't have to stay that way.
And we can be stronger as a result of it, and we can
broken forward. Place. Right.
So that's what I see your journey as in regards to
Yeah.
paying it forward to make the community stronger.
Yes.
Certainly, I don't like that you had to experience all that and had to be broken, but what you've rebuilt.
And that's true for everybody. As you're running in,
Sure.
and you've heard people in your work, or even as executive director, your team has as well, people in crisis, people who just feel like I cannot face one more barrier or something horrible has happened. And that there is a means within us or maybe someone who can help make you stronger in those broken places, rebuild. And so you don't have to accept the status of that you're broken forever. And I think obviously the Olmsted decision was a good lesson that people don't accept a certain way they're living as that's how they have to live in an institution. That's one version of it, right? But the other is that my sister did not have to lead the life where people were abusing her and that my family didn't even know except me. My brothers to this day don't really know because I was the only one who saw it. And, I think the larger problem for me is, and I kept thinking, this has gone on for a while and I'm just catching it now. So even at the school when she was being made fun, and it wasn't just her, it was other students too. And the other abuse that it was going on for a while. And by the way, my hands were not totally clean. The first day when we got on a bus to go to school, my sister said, I'll save you a seat. And she saved me a seat and I just walked past her. And I kept thinking, well, she's my sister. I don't want to sit with her. I kept thinking that was the reason why I walked past her. But then I sat in the back and she looked really hurt. So this is actually a few days before that incident where she was made fun of. And I sat there thinking, that's not the reason why you walked past her. The reason you walked past her is because you didn't want people to make fun of you, that you were ashamed of her. And I sat back there so upset with myself. Yeah, I was really upset with myself. And I never did that again. I don't know if I apologized to her, but I had to face my own shortcoming. I mean, I was 12 years old, but that doesn't excuse me that I did that. But the fact I am thankful that I recognized it instantly as I sat in the back and stared at her, and she just looked devastated. And I just thought I would never do that again. And I didn't. But so we're all capable of doing things that harm another person. And I think helps or makes us stronger in the broken places is that we do something about it, right?
I think it's important to have the self-reflection, and to have it at the age of 12 is very commendable, I will say.
And I think that's what you're trying to do in having conversations at different levels, because then we learn from each other. I mean, I so wish my parents would have had this conversation, with other people, then they would have learned, because they were great. And I give them a lot of props, especially now looking back, because they didn't have any tools, no internet, nothing. And the culture was working against them to keep my sister out, with us. Other Japanese families who had people the same age with developmental disabilities, they hid their kid. And for some reason, because of my parents' behavior, my grandparents, my especially the ones that came from Japan, were pretty cool about it. Now, normally a Japanese person from Japan would not. They hate, but they all treat her the same way. I think my parents, again, made it stronger in the broken plate. They taught by their own example, another generation that is not used to dealing with things that would cause shame to the family. I don't know if in Chinese or other cultures it's like, well, it is like that generally in Asian cultures. So I never thought about that until just talking about it just now, that how my parents actually taught my grandparents. It wasn't like they sat down and had a conversation, because Asian people don't do that. So,
it's by modeling by actions, right? I think it's just.
But they taught by action but they taught us. But I always thought that was the normal behavior, that you would treat her like a normal human being. You know what the other thing though I learned, and I think this is something you're trying to teach again, is that you also have to learn something else, right? How to teach someone that they're not a human being. If I was taught the reverse, it's possible. Why is these group of people teaching or acting in this way, that they felt they could make fun of people coming out of room 31, the special ed class, the MR room, and treat them in such a humiliating way. And it wasn't just one day that happened. It just kept happening. I was able to stop that one, the practice of just making them the target as being, just that they're the only ones who do janitorial work. But even then there was other incidences. So, which also, you can only solve so many problems at once, but then as you see it, that reminds me of why I have to do what I do. So it kind of, my commitment grew and it didn't get smaller.
And I think it's great, because I think schools nowadays, I think when I was growing up, definitely there was the special ed room, but there wasn't a lot of integration, right? So it was, and populations were kept very separate. I think some of the things that you discussed was discrimination, bullying, all of those conversations are being had at a greater magnitude, which is really great, because when you look at it, what does it stem from? Stems possibly from fear of the unknown, or it could be maybe insecurity.
Well, and I don't want to say necessarily bad parenting on those kids, but I think there's some levels when you teach your children not to treat other people in a decent way, then that kind of thing doesn't happen. Because there's a lot of students who treated my sisters and others in special ed class fine. But there was quite a number of people who felt it was okay. And I just kept thinking, something in their home environment taught them that was okay. It wasn't they just came to junior high school or high school and, now I'll be indecent to another human being. They learned that somewhere else. And I just think I do think this is, again, something, and it's not just for the regional centers, whether it's schools or providers working together and with the families of and I think you're trying to do that as you engage with people, so that they recognize whether it's Alex or my sister or anybody is a human being, you respect them. We normally do that because we're used to working with people and seeing it, and that's our life. not everybody does, right? I bet if you had even within your family, larger family, there's always someone that doesn't know how to talk to a person with disabilities. They kind of, that's kind of natural, but if you can kind of help guide them like my parents did with my grandparents, then suddenly, things become normal.
I mean, I will say it's very interesting because in my former life as a provider, I will say I've worked in so many different types of services. With all that being said, I remember encountering some of my staff working with the developmentally disabled, and they will there was one staff member that, well-intentioned, would come to work and see that an adult individual might have brought, like, let's just say, chips and burgers and whatever it might be for lunch. And she would throw it away, and she would, out of her own pocket, get a healthier meal. And I said, okay, well, so-and-so, I saw you eating chips the other day, pizza. I didn't come and throw away your meal, right? So I feel like that wasn't even that long ago. That was a year ago. So these conversations still need to occur in regards to respecting the individual. And oftentimes I do still see families, I see, service providers making the decision for the individual, when a lot of the times it's easy just to say, how do you feel about it? Just ask the individual rather than ask the caregiver next to the individual, right? So I think even now there's still a lot of improvement that need to be made, but it doesn't come from a bad place.
No.
Like even that story that I said doesn't come from a bad place, but it doesn't respect the individual in the way that everybody else.
And I think that what happens is there's, new generations of people coming in. So we think that we train people once or even a cut, and that's it. But we forget that there's new people coming in. And so they're coming in with different, backgrounds. And maybe it's a little more advanced than it was 40, 50 years ago. But some of the biases that existed, in more recent times are still there. But we think, but we trained that away. We already did the implicit bias, or we treated something about cultural competency or how to treat people with respect if you have a disability. But the reality is that's like an ongoing thing. It's like ABA, right? You got to be repetitive sometimes until the behavior just doesn't vanish. It might for that individual, but then the next individual comes along. I mean, it's almost like you do ABA for one age group and problem solved. But then there's another group that comes in.
Well, it's all individualized as well. So.
Right. And it has to be individualized because not everybody takes information the same way. And but I do think I think the engagement will help if it's done, and it's time consuming, but that's what's needed. And to help people along because they don't always know the options they're used to making decisions for a person, but there's a way to do that without having to actually overtly make a decision. Well, people learn to do that, especially when you're kids. I had 4 other kids besides Alex as they grew into teenagers. And I had to act like they thought it was their decision.
Of course.
Because now they have no problem. They're all in their 20s or 40s. No problem telling me what to do, though. That's different. But I do think there's a way that we have to teach each other. Like, how do we help each other? With Alex, me and Alex, we've worked out a system, where he makes a lot of his own decisions. He has his own refrigerator in his room. He does his own meals for lunchtime. I do the dinner and breakfast. But I will also talk to you, right? Like, what do you want for dinner? What do you want? But I also taught him something else. My life was, I was not born to serve Alex. And therefore, Alex needs to respect me. So,
that's important.
Alex, what do you say now? You say, I asked him what he wants or what restaurant do you want to go to? And Alex, what do you say? I said, the opposite of what you just said. And he said, what? No, but I taught him that because one of the flaws in our system is it seems...
It's overly accommodating?
Well, it's taught that person-centered to the point means that I think people have forgotten that person-centered is not self-centered. And that we should not be teaching people that the only person that exists in the world is them. And we're teaching people that.
Because it's not real life, and that doesn't equip them. For instance, should a parent no longer be around, to be able to navigate their environment more independently and be able to respect other people's
But see,
preferences and
but
boundaries
the
as well.
key there is respect. Because if we teach other people to respect Alex or my sister or others, we are not doing the same, at least not that I've seen, of making sure Alex and everyone else respects other people. It wasn't until you moved in with me that you even said thank you to the Lyft driver. And I tried to get you to say thank you, and you'd go, thank you. You whispered. I said, you know what? We're not leaving until you say thank you until he can hear it. Because if he can't hear it, you didn't say thank you. And, you're not going to do that. You're not going to treat this man like he works for you. Now, he's a little chatterbox. I mean, you say it very loudly, thank you. In other words, I say thank you, but he on his own does that. In Starbucks, he goes in by himself. I wait outside. He has his ATM card, but he has, by the way, he has his own bank account, but he has his ATM card or a gift card, and he does his own ordering. So I'm outside. So they all know him. One thing I taught him, and one thing you do now on his own, is he tips. You say thank you to the person helping you, and he tips them.
And maybe sometimes you can get something for Dad.
I've been waiting. Oh, by the way, Alex, they gave you that free Christmas gift or the extra drink. I said, what? And what I love though is the workers, they all know Alex. And one thing I always ask them is you always find out their name. And because I will test him when he comes out, I say, who served you? And he says, well, Kelly and whatever. And so now he knows. But the thing is, they all know him because before I used to order for him, they all knew me. Now, and for the past couple of years now, I stay outside and they all know Alex. They don't know me at all.
That's how you build community.
I
That's
just love
how we
it.
do
I mean,
integration.
it's not that, he's more important to me. It's just, I don't go in there. I'm not the customer. So one day we're coming from our apartment because Starbucks is only a block away. And this guy comes, he walks by us. He says, hey, Alex. And hey, Paul. I went, do I know this person? And then remember he walked and he lives in our apartment complex. And then Alex says, oh yeah, he works at Starbucks. And I love that because it didn't mean that I was a non-entity. Just, I had no connection to him. So why would he? But I love the fact that he had a connection with Alex. But it doesn't take away from the fact that one of my biggest pushes as an advocate is we respect everyone, the person serving you, as well as the person who needs to serve help. And that is equal. And people get first upset with me. I said, really? You want to debate me on the fact that you think you're more equal than this other person? I tell them, here's what I want you to do. There's a movie called The Help. Watch that. Because white people treated my grandparents who were forced into internment camps. They lost everything. When they returned home, they had businesses. They had farms. They had to do domestic work. My grandmother did what is now what we would call IHSS. My other grandparents worked cleaning white people's home in Pebble Beach. And I went with them as an 8-year-old. And I would see how those people treated my grandparents. Good moments were fine, just like in the movie Help. Oh, hi, but then bad moments, they would treat them like children, berate them. I saw that. And I vowed I would never allow a person to do that to my grandparents again, but also to treat workers. So I think one thing I would urge all of you here at North LA and all of the providers, do not think that the center of the universe is the person with developmental disabilities. They are a part of the universe. But if they aren't taught and we aren't taught to recognize that there are other stars in that galaxy, then all we're teaching that we're thinking there are some people who are privileged and there's other people who are born to serve you. And that is absolutely horrible.
So we wanted to hear a little bit more about CD CAN. We wanted to see what you envision for the future. We know that it's been a lifeline for thousands of individuals. I believe your newsletter informing people about public policy that is occurring with our population is currently there's 65,000 subscribers, I believe.
75, yeah. Right.
75,000. Yeah. Okay, outdated news. That's incredible. So I guess what I'm wondering is if you could tell our listeners a little bit more about
It started really small. I saw a need that people in our community weren't getting any credible information. It was always spun in some way. So a lobbyist group, a trade association would send out their information, but it was always telling them what to do.
There's a spin to it.
Yeah, it was primarily always telling them what to do. Even the good organizations no matter what you want to believe in them, whether it's PAI, what's now called Disability Rights, again, good organization, or any of these other organizations, advocacy groups, trade associations, even ARCA, all of them, when they send a message out, it's really telling you to do something that they want you to do. It's not just straight news. And I kept thinking, why is it that our community is deprived of getting credible information that they can also, if they want to, they can go get the source document and decide if it's true. And they can help make decisions about what to do. Now, what's more inclusive or supported decision-making than that, right? So in a sense, I was trying to do supported decision-making to the larger community of people with developmental disabilities. That's why I encourage you to keep this podcast, because my newsletter at first, when I did it, probably only had, like, I think I told you, like a half a dozen. I mean, I was sending it out like, I thought, hey, I got an audience of 12 people. So, and then 24. And then suddenly it replicated and it kept getting bigger and bigger. And the Sacramento Bee did a profile on me 2004. And she came to my office because she wanted to see what I did. I said I had a computer, phone line back then, because I couldn't afford having a digital line. So it was a phone line. And I had thousands and thousands of people on the list by then. I said, so what do you do? I said, just type this report. So I just pressed send, and it just sat there, because on a dial, it's trying to get the newsletter out to thousands of people. So she wanted to see if that was true that I was doing it this way.
That was very innovative at that time.
Well, back then, because there was no YouTube, there was no Google, there was none of that, right? There was no way to get information, no websites. One of the most powerful things was back in 2003. So I started probably in 2000 in terms of the newsletter. But in 2003, I started developing a relationship with the administration, then Schwarzenegger, actually even then Governor Davis's people. So the pivotal thing was on the Lanterman suspension. There was rumors that the Governor Schwarzenegger was going to suspend the Lanterman Act, but there was no evidence. But someone in the administration, I still can't disclose who it was, gave me the legislative language. And I had to retype it because I didn't want to, and back then you couldn't put a PDF file attached to an email. So I retyped it also so that they couldn't trace it back to that individual. And it clearly said they were going to suspend the Lanterman Act. I sent it out to everybody. And people, the media was on my list too. LA Times, everybody. And then I got dozens and dozens of calls from media. Said, we didn't believe this was happening until we saw it. And then other people firsthand got it across the state. And I think that shows the power of one individual, but also the power of information to bring people together to realize that's what's happening. That's what you're trying to do with this. And it does build small. So don't be discouraged by that, because I built it up. But I was more proud of less about the numbers, but the fact that I was giving out good information. My community, your community, deserves the best information possible, right? But we don't get it most of the time. And so I think that's what I was proud that I did it then and continue to do it now. Now, every so often I kind of screw up and I put my opinion in it. And people let me know when that happens. That happened one time, actually. And I and like any good person who doesn't follow your ABA plan, I just said, okay, I won't do that no more.
I'm curious, you were a team of one before. How big is your team currently at CDJM?
One.
It's still one. It's just you?
Yeah. And it's hard because I don't cover just issues with the DD system. I cover Medi-Cal, I cover IHSS, I cover behavioral health, housing. I cover it at the federal level, and I have a good understanding of both. Now, luckily, I worked in the legislature, and I'm familiar. And I also had worked for AARP, so I was back in Washington. I mean, I lived in Sacramento, but I was back in Washington a lot, so I knew how that worked. And I understand the court system, so I follow legal stuff. It's hard, though, because I have to say like an expert as much as possible in all these different things. Another reason is my mailing list includes legislators, staffers, people from the departments. So they know if my information is accurate or not. I got people on CMS, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. I'm aware that my audience is not just, the mom and pops, so I can just say something stupid and, they won't know. I have to stay on top of my game. My information has to be as accurate as possible because other people who are experts are reading it. And I got lobbyists reading it too. Now, it bothers me that there was someone from one big association, it was a nursing facility association would, they fired her eventually. But she would cut and paste my report, basically, don't attribute anything to me and say it was from her. But so I decided to commit my life to doing that. And also we did things called a CD-CAN town hall telemeetings. Back then, the only technology was conference calls, but and we had state policymakers on. I insisted that it was live, and we would ask direct questions, open it up to the audience who can ask questions. So we had the director of the Medicaid program and these were during when they had cuts, and to respond to a person in Imperial County, like, well, how come I can't get my wheelchair repaired? He's getting an answer from the head of the Medicaid services in California. Or Senator John Burton, who was then President Pro Tem. When they were doing a reauthorization of IDEA, I got someone from then Senator Kennedy's office on.
It's really powerful.
And it was because our audience, and we would have the Secretary of the Health and Human Services Agency, it was in Ken Belche, and later on it was every one of them that followed, to answer questions. But I insisted it had to be live. So it's not like, canned questions they had to answer live. But they trusted me that I would not let anybody disrespect them. I would cut it off instantly if anybody was getting abusive. And that goes back to saying we're not the most important people in the world either. And so I think that's what our audiences grew from there. It was just a couple of dozen. It grew to several hundreds to sometimes 1,000. Now, ironically, the first group because I had no money to actually sponsor it, was ARCA. And a lot of people don't know that. And Bob Baldo, who I actually am good friends with, and I respect him, he foolishly said, hey, I said, Bob, we need someone to help. Can I use your conference call line? He says, oh, yeah. He just thought, we're just doing like a group meeting of 5 people. So I said, okay. And we did 3 of those. Of several hundreds of people at a time. Yeah. He finally said, Marty, we can't do this anymore. You're breaking our budget. And I said, oh, I was wondering when you were, but I actually should publicize the fact that ARCA actually was the first people that supported our town hall meetings. Hopefully it didn't break the ARCA budget that year, because you can't continue that, level of number of callers on. That just goes to show you that sometimes you have unlikely partners. And Bob trusted me too. And I think I can get beyond the fact that I was a family member and a lot of antagonism towards regional centers even back then. But I can get beyond that. I said, okay, we can work together legitimately and genuinely. And we had a good relationship.
So we have one final question. You've long framed disability rights as civil rights. How do we keep that framing front and center when policy decisions threaten to roll back progress?
By keeping the person in front of the conversation always, the child or the person who needs the help, who has disabilities, or the people who provide the services. You keep those people front and center of whatever we're talking about. So it's not some abstract discussion like, oh, we're talking about the rights of thousands of human beings. We're talking about my child or this individual, this worker. I think when you reframe it that way, you're not going to win all the time, but I think that keeps us grounded in what we're talking about. That civil rights or human rights or civil rights or disability rights ultimately ends up being about a person. I had the opportunity to meet Lois Curtis, who was one of the plaintiffs of the Olmstead decision. The other one was Elaine Wilson, and I knew her too. But in front of 1,500 people, I introduced her. I gave a keynote, but I also introduced her. And the way she speaks is responding to questions. And then we became friends afterwards. But one of the questions I asked her is, what did you enjoy most about living in your own home? I already knew what she would likely say, but other people were probably expecting some very grand, thing about, well, it's my right and whatever, and some kind of thing about disability rights or whatever. But it was something very, to me, more profound. It was because I can drink lemonade whenever I want to.
The power of just freedoms, right? I think
if anybody understood, if you live in an institutional setting,
yes,
in what was basically a developmental center in Georgia, that you didn't even have that small choice, and that small choice meant everything to her. And she learned, she had other things that she enjoyed, but the fact that she focused in on that, I thought was really profound. That's one thing I wrote, just as much I remember the things with my sister. And there were good things with my sister too, by the way. But I remember that because to me, it was so profound. And what did it do? It wasn't about the, grand statement about disability rights. It was ultimately about a very human being's experience of living on their own and having their own choices on something as small as I can drink lemonade whenever I want to. And I just think we got to remember that it's not always about some big thing like, it has to be that I have my choices in life and, some broader thing. Bring it down to the individual. What's Alex's choices? And what's the choices of me as a family member or a parent or a choice of the worker? Let's never forget that when we ask that question, we're asking it of all the people that make up our community, because the community is not just Alex. And it doesn't take away anything when we say it's not just Alex, it's me. It's the person who actually provides services. It's the service coordinator that helps them.
We can definitely attest to that. I know one of the things that we have been doing with the public information team is that we're starting all of our board meetings, committee meetings with testimonials, success stories from our consumer population, where they're just sharing how their circle support has enabled them to live the life of their own choosing. And just seeing those little snapshots has made such an impression. I will say that when I provide, updates, all of that, some of that can be forgettable, but the stories that we share, they remember the stories, and that drives action.
And I think that's, you caught on to something. And I think, Chris and his team has caught on to that too, it's those stories, and they're human, right? And they're person-centered. They're about the individual. And we always look for the big story, but sometimes, more often than not, it's that story that's actually bigger than anything else. Just remember the webinar, the video of the transportation and the things that Juan and George and Curtis raised. And those are, and if you really listen, there was a theme coming about their concerns of transportation. One of them was safety. A lot of people wouldn't think of that as a major issue. They would think, well, it's the fact that you don't have access to this. But ultimately, it was about safety. Juan had said is that we're targets. And when he said that, it reminded me of what happened to my sister. Because that's what he meant. It wasn't just that he would be robbed and he was looking out for his wife, but he was thinking we're targets. People make fun of us. Someone's going to make... If there's no one there to intercede, that's what he was worried about. And I kept thinking, we're in the 21st century. This is like 50 years after what happened to my sister. And that
is still a problem.
Yeah. And I think that's something we have to be aware of, that, we can do the trainings and everything, but it's an ongoing thing. And in the teachable moments, unfortunately, are several moments that go on. And doesn't mean we failed. It just means that's how human nature is, right? And I just think that's, not just your responsibility, but I think it's ours too, everyone's. But I think it's just something we've got to remember. So I picked up on that when Juan and George said, and Curtis said that, because it kind of went under the wire, among other things. But I picked up on that strongly. And it broke my heart because, Juan, and his wife, they wanted to go to Las Vegas, or they wanted to do things and enjoy life. And they don't have access to the same type of transportation, let's say, that Curtis does. And it kind of broke my heart because he wants to be able to do these things in life, especially at the time of his life now. And the barriers that exist aren't just the inaccessibility. If he can get on a train, you mentioned trains or public buses, you can get on those things. They're accessible, but he says they're not safe.
So what was really powerful about that is because that actually surprised me too. And my reflection was, wow, I am the executive director of a large regional center, and I did not think about safety in that way. I thought about safety in regards to making sure the vehicle was safe, I think most people would think compliant, all of those things, which is also in my self-reflection, thinking about just why it's so important to always connect with self-advocates and that lived experience. Because as we think about procedures, policies, all the things out there.
But it wasn't just self-advocates. We had Nico was on there, and I made it a point to ask Nico questions. I'm trying to teach other people, please don't just ask about transportation just to these other three. That's important. But why isn't the concerns or the issues surrounding Nico, or at least the ones he's aware of, important too. He has a family, and I just think, and that doesn't take away anything from Juan or Curtis. In fact, they didn't even object. They wanted that to happen. To hear Nico speak, and I'm glad he did. But I made it a point to ask him, because in the old days, you would ignore him like he's a faceless person. You wouldn't even introduce his name. And I made a point to mention his name. I said, do I have your name right? Right. And he said, well, thank you for asking. It's just like, but we got to teach people and each other in our own community first.
Absolutely.
That every life matters here. And please do not act like the only life that matters is my son. That does nothing for him and does nothing for me. But if you said that his life means something and it's equal to mine, that means something. That he deserves respect, so do I. That means something.
Marty, I just want to thank you. Alex, I want to thank you for hanging in there with us.
But I really, really enjoyed everyone here. Thank you
Thank you.